one and all, once again, back to Exploring Arda, a Tolkien-centered podcast where I am your host, Jackson, and I read through a bunch of Tolkien's works other than Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. And of course, throughout this journey, we've been doing a lot of this of the Silmarillion, and so I'm getting ever closer to ending the book. Kind of like skipped ahead for me personally, just to see how far I am. And we are getting pretty close to the end of the Silmarillion, so that's really good. And I only say that because it's not like close as in like the next couple episodes, but I'm trying to shoot for ending the year with Silmarillion. That'd be really great. Also, I did a few episodes back another guest, so hopefully you guys can go and check that out. And then obviously, right now we just ended the pretty much a two-part chapter of Túrin. Very, very sad, and I would consider it to be a grim, dark kind of chapter of the Silmarillion, even though there's a lot of them. But yeah, and then obviously now we are again back into the Silmarillion with chapter 22 of the Ruin of Doriath. So, I'm just gonna like jump into the chapter itself. Just because I want to get into the reading, and I'll do all the other extra stuff at the end because I feel like that's just kind of better, and that's just, I don't know, as a listener, it's probably better for you guys. So we're just gonna go right into the story. So let's do it. So ended the tale of Túrin Turambar, but Morgoth did not sleep nor rest from evil, and his dealings with the House of Hadar were not yet ended. Against them his malice was unsated, though Húrin was under his eye, and Morin wandered distraught in the wild. Unhappy was the lot of Húrin, and for all that Morgoth knew of the working of his malice, Húrin knew also. But lies were mingled with the truth, and aught that was good was hidden or distorted. In all ways, Morgoth sought most to cast an evil light on those things that Thingol and Melian had done, for he hated them and feared them. When therefore he judged the time to be ripe, he released Húrin from his bondage, bidding him to go whither he would, and he feigned that in this he was moved by pity, as for an enemy utterly defeated. But he lied, for his purpose was that Húrin should still further his hatred for elves and men ere he died. Then little though he trusted the words of Morgoth, knowing indeed that he was without pity, Húrin took his freedom and went forth in grief, embittered by the words of the Dark Lord. And a year was now gone since the death of Túrin his son. For 28 years he had been captive in Angband, and he was grown grim to look upon. His hair and beard were white and long, but he walked unbowed, bearing a great black staff, and he was girt with a sword. Thus he passed into Hithlum, and tidings came to the chieftains of the Easterlings that there was a great riding of captains and black soldiers of Angband over the sands of Anfoglith, and with them came an old man, as one that was held in high honor. Therefore they did not lay hands on Húrin, but let him walk at will in those lands, in which they were wise, for the remnant of his own people shunned him, because of his coming from Angband as one in league in honor with Morgoth. Thus his freedom did but increase the bitterness of Húrin's heart, and he departed from the land of Hithlum, and went up into the mountains. Thence he descried far off amid the clouds the peaks of the Crissaegrim, and he remembered Turgon, and he desired to come again to the hidden realm of Gondolin. He went down therefore from Eredwethrin, and he knew not that the creatures of Morgoth watched all his steps. And crossing over the Brithiac, he passed into Dimbar, and came to the dark feet at the Echoriath. All the land was cold and desolate, and he looked about him with little hope, standing at the foot of a great fall of stones beneath a sheer rock wall. And he knew not this was all that was now left to see of the old way of escape. The dry river was blocked, and the arched gate was buried. Then Húrin looked up to the grey sky, thinking that he might once more descry the eagles, as he had done long ago in his youth. But he saw only the shadows blown from the east, and clouds swirling about the inaccessible peaks, and he heard only the wind hissing over the stones. Alright, so I'm just going to do a quick break here. So, yeah, we get to Húrin's pretty much let go of Morgoth, but only because Morgoth knew of Túrin's death and all that, and the dark deeds that encompassed all his tales, probably including the death of Glaurung, which is why probably why Morgoth was kind of upset, and he's just like, well, since Túrin is dead, then I can release Húrin because he's going to go out in grief and realize that his son is dead and, just become even more depressed than he already is. Kind of like that. And then now Húrin? That's weird. Húrin is basically just traveling here and there, trying to find shelter, and he remembers Gondolin, but he looks like really haggard and old, and so he's like, things are watching him, but now he's trying to get into Gondolin, so that's that. Back to it here. But the watch of the great eagles was now redoubled, and they marked Húrin well, far below, forlorn in the fading light. And straightway Thorondor himself, since the tidings seemed great, brought word to Turgon. But Turgon said, "Does Morgoth sleep? You were mistaken." "Not so," said Thorondor. "If the eagles of Manwë were wont to err thus, then long ago, lord, your hiding would have been in vain." "Then your words bode ill," said Turgon, "for they can bear but one meaning. Even Húrin Thalion has surrendered to the will of Morgoth. My heart is shut." But when Thorondor was gone, Turgon sat long in thought, and he was troubled, remembering the deeds of Húrin and of Dorlomin. And he opened his heart and sent to the eagles to seek for Húrin, and to bring him, if they might, to Gondolin. But it was too late, and they never saw him again, in light or in shadow. For Húrin stood in despair before the silent cliffs of the Doriath, and the westering sun, piercing the clouds, stained his white hair with red. Then he cried aloud in the wilderness, heedless of any ears, and he cursed the pitiless land. And standing at last upon a high rock, he looked towards Gondolin, and called in a great voice, "Turgon, Turgon, remember the fen of Serech. O Turgon, will you not hear in your hidden halls?" But there was no sound save the wind and the dry grasses. "Even so they hissed in Serech at the sunset," he said. And as he spoke, the sun went behind the mountains of shadow, and a darkness fell about him, and the wind ceased, and there was silence in the waste. Yet there were ears that heard the words that Húrin spoke, and report of all came soon to the dark throne in the north. And Morgoth smiled, for he knew now clearly in what region Turgon dwelt, though because of the eagles no spy of his could yet come within sight of the land behind the encircling mountains. This was the first evil that the freedom of Húrin achieved. As darkness fell, Húrin stumbled from the rock, and fell into a heavy sleep of grief. But in his sleep he heard the voice of Morwen lamenting, and often she spoke his name, and it seemed to him that her voice came out of Brethil. Therefore, when he awoke in the coming day, he arose, and went back to the Brithiac, and passing along the eaves of Brethil, he came at a time to the crossings of Teaglin. The night sentinels saw him, but they were filled with dread, for they thought they saw a ghost out of some ancient battle mound that walked with darkness about it. And therefore Húrin was not stayed, and he came at last to the place of the burning of Glaurung, and saw the tall stone standing near the brink of Cabed Neramarth. But Húrin did not look at the stone, for he knew what was written there, and his eyes had seen that he was not alone. Sitting in the shadow of the stone there was a woman, bent over her knees, and as Húrin stood there silent, she cast back her tattered hood, can't read, and lifted her face. Grey she was and old, but suddenly her eyes looked into his, and he knew her. For though they were wild and full of fear, that light still gleamed in them that long ago had earned for her the name Eladwin, proudest and most beautiful of mortal women in the days of old. "You come at last," she said. "I have waited too long." "It was a dark road. I have come as I could," he answered. "But you are late," said Morwen. "They are lost." "I know it," he said, "but you are not." But Morwen said, "Almost. I am spent. I shall go with the sun. Now little time is left. If you know, tell me, how did she find him?" But Húrin did not answer, and they sat beside the stone, and did not speak again. And when the sun went down, Morwen sighed and clasped his hand, and was still, and Húrin knew that she had died. He looked down at her in the twilight, and it seemed to him that the lines of grief and cruel hardship were smoothed away. She was not conquered, he said, and he closed her eyes, and sat unmoving beside her as the night drew on. The waters of Cabed Neramarth roared on, but he heard no sound, and he saw nothing, and felt nothing, for his heart was stone within him. But there came a chill wind that drove sharp rain into his face, and he was roused, and anger rose in him like smoke, mastering reason, so that all his desire was to seek vengeance for his wrongs, and for the wrongs of his kin, accusing in his anguish all that who had ever had dealings with them. Then he rose up, and he made a grave for Morwen above Cavad Neramarth, on the west side of the stone, and upon it he cut these words, Here lies also Morwen Eladwin. It is, a little bit more. Sorry. It is told that a seer and a harp player of Bethel named Glirhuin, Glirhuin? Yeah, I'll do that. Made a song saying that the stone of the hapless should not be defiled by Morgoth nor ever thrown down, not though the sea should drown all the land, as after indeed befell. And still Tol Morwen stands alone in the water beyond the new coasts that were made in the days of the wrath of the Valar. But Húrin does not lie there, for his doom drove him on, and the shadow still followed him. So, now we can do a little bit of break. So along his wanderings and whatnot, he actually comes across the pretty much the waterfall where Glaurung gets killed by Túrin. And he kind of like recognizes this spot, I guess, as he reads writing, and then he actually gets to see Morwen one last time before she literally dies in his arms. So it's a very, it's another dark part of the story as well, because Morgoth does curse him and his bloodline. So I suppose maybe that was part of that curse, to see Morwen literally, die in his arms. But at the same time, like, for him, I feel like that would be better than just like learning about her death. So it's actually not too bad for Morwen. And I mean, they're mortal. So I mean, eventually it's gonna happen somehow. And if they're still alive at that age, that's pretty good. So especially in like medieval fantasy times. So, but yeah, he pretty much makes her like a little marking on the stone, as a little remembrance for her, and then he actually goes on. I would have thought that, like, for Húrin and whatnot, that he would pretty much go, like, take the easy way out. But he's very, very strong, and his will is very, very strong too as well. So I suppose, like, you can see where Túrin got his mindset from. So. But before I kind of go rambling on, we're just going to go right back into the story here. So, let's do it. Now Húrin crossed over Teglin and passed southwards down the ancient road that led to Nargathrond, and he saw far off to the eastward the lonely height of Amon-Rûd, and knew what had befallen there. At length he came to the banks of Narog, and ventured the passage of the wild river upon the fallen stones of the bridge, as Mablung of Doriath had ventured it before him. And he stood before the broken doors of Felagund, leaning upon his staff. Here it must be told that after the departure of Glaurung, did I say Mim? No, I said Mim the first time, yeah. Mim the petty dwarf had found his way to Nargathrond, and crept within the ruined halls, and he took possession of them, and sat there fingering the gold and the gems, letting them run ever through his hands, for none came nigh to despoil him, from dread of the spirit of Glaurung in his very memory. But now one had come, and stood upon the threshold, and Mim came forth, and demanded to know his purpose. But Húrin said, Who are you, that would hinder me from entering the house of Finron Felagund? Then the dwarf answered, I am Mim, and before the proud ones came from over the sea, dwarves delved the halls of Nulu... This is a hard one. Nulukizdin. I'll say that, Nulukizdin. I have but returned to take what is mine, for I am the last of my people. Then you shall enjoy your inheritance no longer, said Húrin. For I am Húrin, son of Galdor, returned out of Angband, and my son was Túrin Turambar, whom you have not forgotten. And he it was that slew Glaurung the dragon, who wasted these halls where you now sit. And now unknown it is to me by whom the dragon helm of Dorlamine was betrayed. Then Mim in great fear besought Húrin to take what he would, but to spare his life. But Húrin gave no heed to his prayer, and slew him before the doors of Nargathrond. There he entered in, and stayed a while in that dreadful place, where the treasures of Valinor lay strewn upon the floors in darkness and decay. But it is told that when Húrin came forth from the wreck of Nargathrond, and stood again beneath the sky, he bore with him, out of all that great hoard, but one thing only. Now Húrin journeyed eastward, and he came to the Maris of Twilight above the falls of Sirion. And there he was taken by the elves that guarded the western marches of Doriath, and brought before King Thingol in the 1,000 caves. Then Thingol was filled with wonder and grief when he looked upon him, and knew that grim and aged man for Húrin Thalion, the captive of Morgoth. But he greeted him fairly and showed him honor. Húrin made no answer to the king, but drew forth from beneath his cloak that one thing which he had taken with him out of Nargathrond, and that was no lesser treasure than the Nauglamir, the necklace of the dwarves, that was made for Finrod Felagund long years before by the craftsmen of Nogrod and Belagost, most famed for all their work in their elder days, and prized by Finrod while he lived above all the treasures of Nargathrond. And Húrin cast it at the feet of Thingol with wild and bitter words. And before he goes into those words, another quick break. It will be pretty quick because Húrin ends up meeting with Mim, who is living in the ruins of Nargathrond. So, and Mim's is like, well, you know what? You can maybe like have a little bit of the treasure, but just, kind of, spare my life, please. But Húrin is not that, he's not that passionate to Mim. And I guess it's like, well, he did betray Túrin pretty bad, like he just let orcs kind of overrun, his own home and let the orcs kill Túrin's guys, all but one. I think it was Beleg that survived. It's like, yeah, I wouldn't say he deserved it, but because that was a very wrathful thing that Húrin does, just kind of like, you know what? Nah, I'm gonna kill you anyway, and he does. So it's like, okay, well, I don't know. Maybe he's just depressed and angry, and all that rage just swelling inside, possibly. But and then he gets, and then he gets before Thingol, and he's just like, well, look, this is what I got, and now we're kind of where we're at in the story. So, so we're just gonna go right to it here. Receive thou thy fee, he cried, for thy fair keeping of my children and my wife. For this is the Nauglamir, whose name is known to many among elves and men, and I bring it to thee out of the darkness of Nargathrond, where Finrod thy kinsman left it behind him when he set forth with Beren son of Barhir to fulfill the errand of Thingol of Doriath. Then Thingol looked upon the great treasure, and knew it for the Nauglamir, and well did he understand Húrin's intent. But being filled with pity, he restrained his wrath, and endured Húrin's scorn. And at the last Melian spoke, and said, Húrin Thalion, Morgoth hath bewitched thee. For he that seeth through Morgoth's eyes, willing or unwilling, seeth all things crooked. Long was Túrin thy son fostered in the halls of Menegroth, and shown love and honor as the son of the king. And it was not by the king's will nor by mine that he came never back to Doriath. And afterwards thy wife and thy daughter were harbored here with honor and goodwill, and we sought by all means that we might to dissuade Morwen from the road to Nargathrond. With the voice of Morgoth thou dost now upbraid thy friends. And hearing the words of Melian, Húrin stood moveless, and he gazed long into the eyes of the queen. And there in Menegroth, defended still by the girdle of Melian from the darkness of the enemy, he read the truth of all that was done, and lasted at last the fullness of woe that was measured for him by Morgoth Boglir. And he spoke no more of what was past, but stooping, lifting up the Nauglamir from where it lay before Thingol's chair, and he gave it to him, saying, Receive now, Lord, the necklace of the dwarves, as a gift from one who has nothing, and as a memorial of Húrin of Doriath. For now my fate is fulfilled, and the purpose of Morgoth achieved, but I am his thrall no longer. Then he turned away and passed out from the thousand caves, and all that saw him fell back before his face, and none sought to withstand his going, nor did he know whither he went. But it is said that Húrin would not live thereafter, being bereft of all purpose and desire, and cast himself at last into the western sea, and so ended the mightiest of the warriors of mortal men. So, another quick break here. I guess Húrin and Thingol kind of get into a disagreement. I wouldn't say it's more of a fight, but Húrin's like, okay, well, I got I got this little necklace here, and I know it comes from nothing, but I think he's just kind of asking, kind of I might have lost for words right now. It's kind of hard to keep up sometimes. Pretty much, he's just what happened with his own family and whatnot. And then Morwen's just well, listen, they were here for a little bit, and we kept them safe, and we tried to urge Morwen not to go anywhere else, but she did anyway, and this is kind of the result of it. And so he pretty much storms out of Nargathrond, and now he's pretty on Nargathrond, Doriath. And so he's just like, well, I'm out. Sorry, guys. And just kind of like very bitter about things. So, and I guess it only makes sense since it is Húrin. So, yeah, and we'll just go back to it once more. And I keep messing with my hair because it's going all over the place. So, but when Húrin was gone from Menegroth, Thingol sat long in silence, gazing upon the great treasure that lay upon his knees. And it came into his mind that it should be remade, and in it should be set the Silmaril. For as the years passed, Thingol's thought turned unceasingly to the Jewel of Feanor, and became bound to it, and he liked not to let it rest, even behind the doors of his inmost treasury, and he was minded now to bear it with him always, waking and sleeping. In those days the dwarves still came on their journeys into Beleriand, and from their mansions in Ered Lindon, and passing over Gallion at Sarn Athrad, the Forn of Stones, they traveled the ancient road to Doriath, for their skill in the workings of metal and stone was very great, and there was much need of their craft in the halls of Menegroth. But they came now no longer in small parties as aforetime, but in great companies well armed for their protection in the perilous lands between Eros and Gallion. And they dwelt in Menegroth at such times in chambers and smithies set apart for them. At that very time great craftsmen of Nauglamir were lately come into Doriath, and the king therefore summoning them declared his desire, that if their skill was great enough they should remake the Nauglamir, and in it set the Silmaril. Then the dwarves looked upon the work of their fathers, and they beheld the wonder, the shining jewel of Feanor, and they were filled with a great lust to possess them, and carry them off to their far homes in the mountains. But they dissembled their mind, and consented to the task. Long was their labor, and Thingol went down alone to their deep smithies, and sat ever among them as they worked. In time his desire was achieved, and the greatest of the works of elves and dwarves were brought together and made one. And its beauty was very great, for now the countless jewels of the Nauglamir did reflect and cast abroad in marvelous hues the light of the Silmaril amidmost. Then Thingol, being alone among them, made to take it up and clasp it about his neck. But the dwarves in that moment withheld it from him, and demanded that he yield it to them, saying, "By what right does the Elven King lay claim to the Nauglamir that was made by our fathers for Finrod Felagund, who is dead? It has come to him but by the hand of Húrin, the man of Doriath, who took it as a thief out of the darkness of Nargathrond." But Thingol perceived their hearts, and saw well that desiring the Silmaril, they sought but a pretext and fair cloak for their true intent. And in his wrath and pride he gave no heed to his peril, but spoke to them in scorn, saying, "How do ye of uncouth race dare to demand aught of me, Elu Thingol, lord of Beleriand, whose life began by the waters Cuivienen, there you go, years uncounted ere the fathers of the stunted people awoke?" And standing tall and proud among them, he bade them with shameful words he be gone unrequited out of Doriath. Then the lust of the dwarves was kindled to rage by the words of the king, and they rose up about him, and laid hands on him, and slew him as he stood. So died in the deep places of Menegroth Elwë Singolo, king of Doriath, who alone of all the children of Iluvatar was joined with one of the Ainur, and he who, alone of the Forsaken Elves, had seen the light of the trees of Valinor, with his last sight gazed upon the Silmaril. Then the dwarves, taking the Nauglamir, passed out of Menegroth, and fled eastward through Region. But tidings went swiftly through the forest, and few of that company came over Eros, for they were pursued to the death as they sought the eastward road, and the Nauglamir was retaken, and brought back in bitter grief to Melian the queen. Yet two there were of the slayers of Thingol who escaped from the pursuit on the eastern marches, and returned at last to their city far off in the Blue Mountains. And there in Nauglamir they told somewhat of what had befallen, saying that the dwarves were slain in Doriath by command of the Elven King, who thus would cheat them of their reward. Then great was the wrath and lamentation of the dwarves of Nauglamir for the death of their kin and their great craftsmen, and they tore their beards and wailed, and long they sat taking thought for vengeance. It is told that they asked aid from Belegost, but it was denied them, and the dwarves of Belegost sought to dissuade them from their purpose. But their counsel was unavailing, and ere long a great host came forth from Nauglamir, and crossing over Gallion, marching westward through Beleriand. Alright, so another break here. yeah, so another death. So not, I mean, this is the third death in the chapter. I mean, each chapter of this like war just kind of just keeps getting worse and worse. And for Thingol, this is like the part where a lot of, I guess, people don't like him. And it's obviously seen because he pretty much just obsesses over the Silmaril. He wants to keep it safe all the time with him, and he's just like, you know what, fine, I got this necklace now, so let's just keep the Silmaril inside of this necklace. And so when the dwarves come, they're like, oh yeah, sure, we'll do it for you. And then when they're finished, they're like, actually, this necklace is for the dwarves, so actually we're gonna keep it, when they already have the Silmaril in the necklace. And then yeah, and then Thingol's like, well, you know what, how about no, you guys are stupid and I'm of the elder race, so I'm gonna, you know, I'm gonna take this for me, and then I'm gonna kill all of you guys. And then the opposite effect happens, where the dwarves actually end up killing him, trying to escape, but to, you know, and then they don't succeed because, well, they all die, and they're like, well, actually, the Elven King commanded us to be killed, and it doesn't make any sense. And yeah, the bitterness of elves and dwarves just keep growing and growing, pretty much. Like, from this moment, that's like a major point in the whole thing of dwarves and elves not getting along. So, but yeah, so now, oh, hold on a minute. I almost lost my place. All right, so now we're gonna go back into the story here. So let's do it. Upon Doriath, a heavy change had fallen. Melian sat long in silence beside Thingol the king, and her thought passed back into the starlit years, into their first meeting among the nightingales of Non-Elmeth in ages past. And she knew that her parting from Thingol was the forerunner of a greater parting, and that the doom of Doriath was drawing nigh. For Melian was of the divine race of the Valar, and she was a Maya of great power and wisdom. But for love of Elwë and Golo, she took upon herself the form of the elder children of Ilúvatar, and in that union she became bound by the chain and trammels, of the flesh of Arda. In that form she bore to him Luthien to Nuviel, and in that form she gained a power over the substance of Arda, and by the girdle of Melian was Doriath defended through long ages from the evils without. But now Thingol lay dead, and his spirit had passed to the halls of Mandos, and with his death a change came also upon Melian. Thus it came to pass that her power was withdrawn in that time from the forests of Neldareth and Region, and Escalduin the enchanted river spoke with a different voice, and Doriath lay open to its enemies. Thereafter Melian spoke to none save to Mablung only, bidding him take heed to the Silmaril, and to send word speedily to Beren and Luthien in Osiriand. And she vanished out of Middle-earth, and passed to the land of the Valar beyond the western sea, to muse upon her sorrows in the gardens of Lorien, whence she came, and this tale speaks of her no more. Thus it was that the host of the Naugrim, crossing over Eros, passed unhindered into the woods of Doriath, and none withstood them, for they were many and fierce, and the captains of the grey elves were cast into doubt and despair, and went hither and thither purposeless. But the dwarves held on their way, and passed over the great bridge, and entered into Menegroth. And there befell a thing most grievous among the sorrowful deeds of the elder days. For there was battle in the thousand caves, and many elves and dwarves were slain, and it had not been forgotten. But the dwarves were victorious, and the halls of Thingol were ransacked and plundered. There fell Mablung of the heavy hand before the doors of the treasury, wherein lay the Nauglamir, and the Silmaril was taken. At that time Beren and Luthien yet dwelled in Tolgalen, the Green Isle in the river Adirond, southernmost of the streams that, falling from Ered Lindan, flowed down to join with Gallion, and their son Dior Eluchiel had to wife Nimloth, kinswoman of Celeborn, prince of Doriath, who was wedded to the lady Galadriel. The sons of Dior and Nimloth were Ellared and Ellarin. There you go. And a daughter also was born to them, and she was named Elwing, which is star spray, for she was born on a night of stars, whose light glittered in the spray of the waterfall of Lanthir Lameth beside her father's house. Now word went swiftly among the elves of Osirian that a great host of dwarves bearing gear of war, had come down out of the mountains and passed over Gallion at the Ford of Stones. These tidings came soon to Beren and Luthien, and in that time also a messenger came to them out of Doriath, telling of what had befallen there. Then Beren arose and left Tol Galen, and summoning to him Dior his son, they went north to the river Asgar, and with them went many of the green elves of Assyrian. Thus it came to pass that when the dwarves of Nagrod, returning from Menegroth with diminished host, came again to Sarn Athrad, they were assailed by unseen enemies, for as they climbed up Galion's banks burdened with the spoils of Doriath, suddenly all the woods were filled with the sound of elven horns, and shafts sped upon them from every side. Many of the dwarves were slain in the first onset, but some escaping from the ambush held together, and fled eastwards towards the mountains. And as they climbed the long slopes beneath Mount Dolmed, there came forth the shepherds of the trees, and they drove the dwarves into the shadowy woods of Ered Lindon, whence it was said came never one to climb the high passes that led to their homes. Alright, so another quick break here. There's another couple pages and a half, so I might do that. I'll just probably finish it after this little break here. So, yeah, news of the betrayal of dwarves and elves eventually reach Beren and Luthien, who are in Assyrian, and it's definitely a bummer for them. And so Beren pretty much is like, well, I gotta do something. So he takes his host, and then there's an attack, and the dwarves are actually slain, despite the elves kind of surprise attacking them, but some of them escape, and then the shepherds of the forest. So, which is interesting, because whenever I hear of shepherds of the forest, I think of the Ents. So are the Ents enemies of the dwarves in the Silmarillion, which would be kind of crazy, but I mean, I suppose, I don't know, because like the elves are more, I guess more towards nature in the woods and the trees and stuff like that, so I guess it would make sense for the Ents to not take the sides of dwarves, but it's just crazy if that's actually what it meant in this part of the chapter, that the Ents end up actually killing the escaped dwarves, which would be crazy, but at the same time it would only make sense. And I'm just going to go with that before we go ahead and go back into the story and finish the chapter. So, here we go. In that battle by Sarn Athrad, Beren fought his last fight, and himself slew the Lord of Nagrod, and wrested from him the necklace of the dwarves. But he dying, laid his curse upon all the treasure. Then Beren gazed in wonder at the self-same jewel of Feanor that he had cut from Morgoth's iron crown, now shining set amid gold and gems by the cunning of the dwarves. And he washed it clean of blood in the waters of the river. And when all was finished, the treasure of Doriath was drowned in the river Asgar. And from that time the river was named anew, Rathlorien, the Golden Bed. But Beren took the Nauglamir and returned to Tol Galen. Little did it ease the grief of Luthien to learn that the Lord of Nagrod was slain, and many dwarves beside. But it is said and sung that Luthien wearing that necklace and that immortal jewel was the vision of greatest beauty and glory that has ever been outside the realm of Valinor. And for a little while the land of the dead that live became like a vision of the land of the Valar, and no place has been since so fair, fruitful, or so filled with light. Now King Thingol's heir bade farewell to Beren and Luthien, and departing from Lanthir Lameth with Nimloth his wife, he came to Menegroth and abode there. And with them went their young sons Ellered and Ellerine, and Elwing their daughter. Then the Sindar received them with joy, and they arose from the darkness of their grief for fallen kin and king, and for the departure of Melian. And Dior Eluchiel set himself to raise anew the glory of the kingdom of Doriath. There came a night of autumn, and when it grew late, one came and smote upon the doors of Menegroth, demanding admittance to the king. He was a lord of the green elves, hastening from Assyrian, and the door wards brought him to where Dior sat alone in his chamber. And there in silence he gave to the king a coffer, and took his leave. But in that coffer lay the necklace of the dwarves, wherein was set the Silmaril. And Dior, looking upon it, knew it for the sign that Beren, Erchamion, and Luthien Tinuviel had died indeed, and gone would go the race of men to a fate beyond the world. Long did Dior gaze upon the Silmaril, which his father and mother had brought beyond hope out of the terror of Morgoth, and in his grief was great that death that had come upon them so soon. But the wise have said that the Silmaril hastened their end, for the flame of the beauty of Luthien, as she wore it, was too bright for mortal lands. Then Dior arose, and about his neck he clasped the Nauglamir, and now he appeared as the fairest of all the children of the world, of threefold race, of the Edain, of the Eldar, and of the Mire of the Blessed Realm. But now the rumor ran among the scattered elves of Beleriand that King Thingol's heir wore the Nauglamir, and they said, "The Silmaril of Feanor burns again in the woods of Doriath." And the oath of the sons of Feanor was waked again from sleep. For a while Luthien wore the necklace of the dwarves, no elf would dare to assail her. But now hearing of the renewal of Doriath, and of Dior's pride, the seven gathered again from wandering, and they sent to him to claim their own. But Dior returned no answer to the sons of Feanor, and Celegorm stirred up his brothers to prepare an assault upon Doriath. They came out unawares in the middle of winter, and fought with Dior in the Thousand Caves, and so befell the second slaying of elf by elf. There fell Celegorm by Dior's hand, and there fell Curfin and dark Caranthir. But Dior was slain also, and Nimloth his wife, and the cruel servants of Celegorm seized his young sons, and left them to starve in the forest. Of this Maedhros indeed repented, and sought for them long in the woods of Doriath, but his search was unavailing, and the fate of Ellared and Ellarine no tale tells. Thus Doriath was destroyed, and never rose again. But the sons of Feanor gained not what they sought, for a remnant of the people fled before them, and with them was Elwing, Dior's daughter, and they escaped, and bearing with them the Silmaril, they came in time to the mouth of the river Sirion by the sea. And thus ends chapter 22. So, yeah, another quick update, I suppose, before ending this episode, is that, Dior pretty much tries to, go back into the Thousand Caves and rule from there. And when he gets the Silmaril, he's like, well, okay, so that means Beren and Luthien are actually dead, because otherwise they would have kept it there with them, which they do for a little bit, which does help, I suppose, for a little bit. But obviously they are mortal. They are considered mortal now, so when they die, they sent it over to him. And now then the elves, the sons of Feanor, are like, so you have the Silmaril now. And they pretty much attack Doriath at night, but the people escape from Doriath with the Silmaril. So another tragedy unfolds at the end of the chapter, and that's just kind of like that's what it seems like. It's like the Silmarils are itself a curse. It turns into a curse, I suppose, just because everybody just desires it to their deepest desire. So it's crazy, very much crazy. But that is the end of the chapter. Let me know what you guys think about the chapter, what you think about Thingol, probably. Like, is he a good king? Is he not? Is he a good character? Things like that, because I never truly liked Thingol, just for a lot of reasons that come up in this chapter especially. We know that for sure Beren and Luthien have passed, especially with this chapter, so this is when they're mortal. And Beren still does his best to kind of like ward off and fight the evil, no matter who it comes from. So it's interesting to see all of the characters coming back together again. But yeah, just let me know what you guys think of the chapter and of the show in the comments. I would definitely appreciate that as well. So also, and I don't have the physical copy with me right now, but be sure to check out my fantasy book called The Lands of Ordia, Power of Heaven. I always forget to include the last the Power of Heaven thing, because it's part of the chapter, or the title. So it is called The Lands of Ordia, Power of Heaven, and it is on Amazon. So, and I'm currently writing the second book, so that's always really fun. Seeing all the progress that I've made, especially from the first book. I guess starting this podcast and reading all these books, most of the Silmarillion and a couple of short stories, and just talking with a couple of guests just really sparks my writing again. A lot of people have different inspirations and motivations that keep them going, but this podcast is definitely one of them for me to just keep that fantasy spark inside. So thank you guys for listening and watching and subscribing, which you guys should totally do. I've been trying to keep up with posting on the actual podcast channels. They might be a little bit delayed just because there's a lot of things going on at once, but thank you guys a lot. I don't have, much subs and many listens, but I didn't think I would get this far with the show already. And it's only been like not even a year. So thank you guys deeply for that, especially. So I think with all of that being said, just stay tuned for the next episode. May the light of Elbereth be with you all. Farewell.